I'm so glad I can now pull up a video without getting an election ad. All right. Good afternoon. Let's get rolling. Welcome back. Hope that the week is going well so far for you. If you're an absolute nerd like me, you spent just about all of last night watching live coverage of the midterm elections. And so I'm a little bit tired and silly. In case this is something you care about, there have been a number of calls that have been made this morning, including the governor's race. So if that's interesting to you, you're welcome to check in on some of that stuff. All right, so to get started for today, I want to take some time to talk to you about the upcoming recording and reflection essay. So this is due in about a week and a half from now, and you will have a long weekend because we will not be meeting on Friday for Labor Day. So what I really encourage you to do is to take advantage of the long weekend and the extra time that you have to make some good progress related to this assignment. In particular, I would really recommend that by the end of this week, you've had your conversation and perhaps you're in the process of transcribing that conversation, because after you do that, you'll need some time to really break down and start to develop the essay itself using that information. So to that end, what I'd like to do is to take some time for you to talk a little bit about what you're planning on for this one. So you don't have to take attendance using this, but I am going to ask you to think about and share in a few minutes who you're planning to talk to for your recorded conversation. One thing to consider is the date and time of the conversation that you're having, the modality that you're having for this conversation, and also just checking in for consent with this person. One great question that I got this morning is, people might be a little bit anxious about it being awkward, right? Or being in a conversation that's recorded and wondering, is this going to be okay? Is this going to be weird? What I can tell you from experience, both of me doing this assignment myself and also of other students, is that in the beginning, when you're recording and talking to somebody, it can seem a little bit weird or a little bit uncomfortable. But over time, as the conversation continues, people find that the normal way that you talk and converse with other people really starts to naturally come out, right? So you start to chat and might even forget that you're even being recorded. So I'd say that the process of the conversation over time becomes a lot more natural. One other thing to remember is that you can pick a snippet of the conversation, so about 15 minutes or so. It doesn't have to be the very beginning of the conversation, but it might be when you've had a lively discussion or things to say in the middle. So you can pick the section that makes the most sense based on what is standing out to you. Another thing to consider is that nonverbal communication plays a really big role, as we've been talking about in the class, especially in face-to-face interactions. So one thing you might focus on is, even if the conversation doesn't have a lot of spoken words, there might have been a lot of nonverbal communication, cues, gestures, and so on that you noticed and are able to pick up on and talk about here. And then the last thing to consider is that you might be going into a conversation with a sense of what you want to talk about and how you want to cover it. But there's a good chance that just because of interpersonal communication being dynamic, changing, evolving over time, that you wind up talking about something completely different. I had a conversation with my dad for this activity, and where we started and where we ended were two really different places. And so give yourself the flexibility for conversation to dynamically evolve and change, because that's how we communicate. So take some time to think about who you're planning to talk to for your conversation, questions or concerns that you have for me and would like to share related to this assignment. And then I encourage you to give yourself a timeline. One thing that can really help is working backwards from the deadline, so you know it's due on the 20th. So what milestones do you need to reach? So maybe it's completing the conversation by the 13th. Maybe it's sending me a draft by the Thursday of the following week, and then completing kind of a revision or review of that rough draft the day before that it's due. You don't have to send me a rough draft or outline, but you're welcome to do so. I will turn around feedback to you and let you know what grade you would anticipate receiving. And as long as I get those before next Friday, I should be able to return them with enough time for you to apply those changes. So take a couple minutes to think about this, and I'm going to ask us to go around and have everybody share who they're thinking about chatting with for their conversation. Yourself another minute or so. Okay. So let's go ahead and go around the room and take some time to share who you're planning to talk to through your recorded conversation. Or if you're still not sure and are trying to decide, who are you thinking about talking with? Start here on this side.
I'm thinking about talking to my
Okay.
I'm gonna hang out with friends tonight. Do it with her.
Nice. Nice. All that. Yeah.
my roommate.
Okay.
My sister.
Okay.
And
All right. So number of folks are doing them so far with roommates, which is great. One thing to think about is just the amount of casual conversation that you have with them. So oftentimes, right, there's a lot of very brief interactions, like you're about to go for class, or maybe you're talking about doing chores. So you might think about how often you have some of those more extended conversations, and when you do, what's going on in terms of location, space, physicality. And you might think back to social penetration theory and what stage you see yourself as this person. Is this somebody you become fast friends with and get along really well with, or is this somebody that you still feel a little bit detached from, or you have a bit of respectful distance, which is going to impact the reciprocity of the relationship, the back and forth of your communication. You might be thinking about how the role of space, including things such as the arrangement of chairs, beds, tables, all of those things, impacts the nonverbal communication and proximity happening in that exchange too. Some good examples here of some ways that you can think about analyzing and making sense of the communication going on. How about here on this side? Yeah, let's start over here.
I'm doing with my grandmother probably via Zoom,
Mhm.
either today, tomorrow, or Friday.
Awesome. Okay.
Planning on doing it with a close friend of mine who just recently moved all the way to Kentucky, so.
Wow. Okay.
My brother,
Okay.
I'm gonna do my roommate.
Uh-huh.
We'll do my roommate as well.
Okay. All right.
My brother.
Okay. It's funny, I had a student this morning who said that they were doing theirs with their advisor, and they were like, oh, you know, 2 birds, 1 stone, you get an advising appointment, and you also get the assignment done, which is interesting, but I like a lot of the folks who are bringing up like family, close friends. There's a good chance that the person you're talking to is somebody that you've had some kind of distance relationship with, like a roommate, previous roommate or friend, or somebody that you're no longer in as close a contact with. I think one thing to pay attention to is how quickly you snap back to some previous patterns of communication, or to what degree do you notice some distance that might not have been present in your relationship prior. So you might be thinking about some of the ways that the dynamics of the relationship have changed. For people that are talking, for instance, to grandparents or people that they really want to reach out to that they haven't had as much of a chance for an extended conversation or story with, right? You might be thinking about the role of culture. How are people telling their stories, sharing their experiences and things going on in their lives? You can both consider the elements of their communication. Part of this reflection is thinking about your own communication, what you notice that's maybe annoying, but also something you didn't pick up on that you do and how you communicate. Again, we're our own worst critics when it comes to hearing ourselves speak and seeing how we communicate. But if we really take a minute and pay attention to what we see as a discrepancy between how we choose to communicate versus how we think we communicate, there's a lot we can learn about how other people are understanding us. So continue to think about this, continue to reach out if you would like some help as you're working through this. Any questions about this assignment that folks have at this point? Yes.
Direct, but is a rough draft necessary?
Nope. You can send it, it's optional. I will give you feedback if you want to, but you don't have to. All right. So last class, we talked about computer-mediated communication. Again, the role of media in shaping our communication is an important thing for us to look at, right? A lot of our communication, especially in the context of COVID, has been through media. We're fairly constantly plugged in. If you have a phone, a laptop, or other device, right? We're pretty constantly getting that information and updates. You can, for instance, if you go into the city, probably notice that just about everywhere now has an app for you to park a car. So media has drastically changed our landscape of how we communicate and how we do things day to day. We'll be looking at that more today in terms of exploring identity development and elements of self-presentation online. So we'll be talking a little bit about how the stages of human development have been impacted by the role of technology. And we'll also be thinking about some major theories, and we'll be doing a group activity that asks us to explore theories that have different assumptions and approaches in media as well. I wanted to start by going over, just as a quick recap, the elements of presentation and identity as we see that happen online. We spent some time last class talking a little bit about the role of impression management. This idea that when we're online, right, we're in many ways able to curate the version of ourselves that we show to other people. And sometimes we do this very intentionally, but other times, right, the things that we're choosing to post or share on social media do distort what's going on, right? We're on Instagram, we're generally not posting the regular day-to-day things that we do, like, look, I had breakfast today, look, I went to the store, right? A lot of those basic things don't get on there, but if you made a really good breakfast, or if you traveled somewhere exciting, that's probably going to show up there. So there's already distortion in terms of what you're choosing to share, but you're also making intentional choices in how you present yourself online. A lot of people prefer texting because they like the idea that they can take the time to develop a response, to look over their response, and to make sure that what they're messaging is aligned with what they want to show, right? If you're communicating face-to-face, you might have anxiety that you're not putting out the version of yourself you want people to see or hear. And this ties to the idea raised by Irving Goffman of both a front stage and a backstage self. This idea of a front stage being the version that everybody sees, right? Your public profile or presence. Think about, for instance, the fact that when you come to class, right, you are wearing clothing, you are in a physical three-dimensional space, right? There's a version of yourself that no matter what, people are picking up on. But if you have that version of yourself online, well, you have photos. You might use a filter, or you might only show part of yourself in a photo. And as a result, you have a lot more ability to regulate what you're sharing. We might also think back last week to our discussion about the Johari window, right? This dealing with the 4 quadrants of identity and how there's much more space for a hidden self, things that you don't disclose to other people in an online context. So impression management and identity online is definitely a really big factor for us to look into. So Erik Erikson, a famous psychologist, sociologist, who looked at this idea of psychosocial development. And from a psychology perspective, it's the ways in which over the course of our lives, we find ourselves presented with different crises and questions that guide the way that we develop as humans. And yes, from a psychology perspective, that's interesting. But the reason that we care in the context of media and communication is to think about the ways in which media is impacting how we're addressing these crises and situations in our lives, right? For a lot of you, you're probably a person who got access to technology somewhere in this range, right? Where you were younger, you were a kid, but you were able to start to engage online and start to use, apps and other resources. My experience growing up was that internet was available, but it was very slow. You didn't have the same development of apps and Wi-Fi that we do now. And so there have been changes in how we use the internet, right? One example that I like to think about is my sister is a middle school teacher in Oregon City. And she told me a story about how some of the middle schoolers were trashing the school bathrooms because apparently it was part of a TikTok trend, right? And they were like trashing the bathrooms. Apparently that was a thing going around. And the behavior, right, the actions that the kids were doing were impacted by relationships to media. Not to say that media is bad inherently or encourages people to do bad things, but that relationship shapes the ways that our senses of self and our ways of communicating online might start to look really different. One image that I find really striking is that as of a few years ago, we will have babies who are holding iPads. And that is something that makes me feel old, but not something that we saw a few years before now. So you might think about how the stage of development is impacted by access to technology and how in the future, right, people are going to be born into technology that we don't even have currently that might impact this as well. So I'm going to show a clip from Erikson's 8 different stages of psychosocial development that I think kind of helps us to capture this a little bit better. And as you're watching, right, consider the ways that media might shape how we're developing our senses of self and addressing some of these crises that come up over the course of our lives.
Erikson's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1, basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, we become industrious, which is another word for hardworking. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5, identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost.
This stage, of course, particularly important in the context of media and media's role in shaping identity.
Key to our learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences the most. Stage 8, ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, how have I done? If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind. Eric.
So I think this visual does a good job of helping us think about these different stages. And in particular, thinking about identity versus role confusion and adolescence, and in adulthood, the idea of intimacy versus isolation, I think are really important things for us to look at. If we consider as teenagers, who are we? How do we develop a sense of self? Well, there's a good chance that we use a lot of online communities, we use media as a way of determining and building our sense of self. For instance, we might find ourselves in a Discord server or in a World of Warcraft guild or some type of group or activity that aligns really well with a lot of our interests and activities, right? When I was a teenager, my big thing was I was really into video game hacking and like Super Mario World hacking and making custom levels and all of that, and found a community of people who were really interested in like designing and modifying classic games. So depending on your stage of development and your interests, right, online and mediated settings can assist in this process of developing identity. If you're concerned about a medical diagnosis or trying to figure out elements of your identity, well, that's just a Google search away. And that's a very different context for us in the process of identity development. And then when we consider, right, intimacy versus isolation, well, that's something a lot of us have experienced over the past several years, right, of recognizing the limits of media and technology in our ability to connect with one another and the ways that we can maintain and continue to have positive relationships with other people. So for instance, one short essay question on a midterm might ask you to think about psychosocial development and explain the ways that media is shaping some of those steps in the development process. So I think a good thing for us to look into it. There's also the idea of online identity presentation. And early in the term, when we talked about uncertainty reduction theory, we laid out some of these ideas in a little bit of detail. But I do think it's a good idea for us to think about how media has shaped our understanding of media. We can think about this as a spectrum. On the one end, we have an anonymous identity. This is somebody who does not have to reveal any information about themselves, or in fact, could be revealing information that is completely false or incorrect. An example might be a forum or website in which people can be completely anonymous, right? The website 4chan has generated a lot of controversy over the years, in large part because it's a forum in which people can be completely anonymous when they post there, right? So anonymous identity and information can be a really big problem. There's also catfishing, right? As we've talked about, people presenting a false version of themselves online that doesn't match their real identity is available through anonymous identity. A pseudonym, right, or pseudonymous identity is essentially a distorted or performing or altered version of yourself. There are things about yourself that are true or correct, but kind of like putting on a funny nose, a pair of glasses, right? Those are looking a little bit different. One way to think about this in online settings are people who are influencers or advertisers or people who have significant celebrity presence, who essentially are taking their identity and taking their identity as a brand, right? So a really good example of this are a lot of singers and performers. So for instance, right, Lady Gaga is a very kind of over-the-top performance in terms of her clothing, music videos, style that is very different than how she acts day to day. That's why people were really surprised when they saw her in A Star Is Born, right? So a pseudonym is a very distorted or different version of yourself, but it does highlight and include aspects of yourself that are correct. And then we have real life identity, and that would just be you. So in this way, it's a question of to what degree are you accurately being reflected online. So if you're doing a Skype call or message or phone conversation with somebody and you know who that person is, or they are visually showing you who they are, then you're getting this accurate reflection in how they're presenting themselves online. So what I'd like us to do now is tackle this a little bit differently. So there are 4 theories that I think are all really good to know in terms of understanding and making sense of the role of media in communication. And when we think about the history of communication and how we've studied media, there are a range of perspectives that we can put on a spectrum. On one extreme, we've got people who really strongly believe that media has an incredibly powerful role in shaping our lives and telling us what to think and telling us how to think and to engage with the world, right? In the past, it's been called the inoculation theory, because like you're directly injecting or placing information and ideas into people's heads. On the other end, right, there is a perspective that media's role is very, very limited. That at the end of the day, it's about us and our decisions, and media does not have a whole lot of power or influence over us. But there's a lot of perspectives that fall somewhere in between too. And so in addition to offering a few different ideas, these theories take different approaches to the role that media shapes our lives in, right? So what I want us to do is to take some time to explore either through the reading or through just some searching online what this theory is in your own words. So rather than taking the exact definition word for word of the theory, I encourage you to kind of give a version of it that you would give maybe to a roommate or friend who is not in this class. How would you describe it to them? How does this theory explain the ways that people develop and share their identities online? So we've been talking a little bit about identity and impression management online. How is that happening here? And lastly, what influence does media have over people's lives according to this theory? Does it say that media is all powerful? Does it say that media is very limited? Where does it fall onto this major question? So I'll show you here for this week's reading. If you scroll down to page 432, that's what gets into these 4 different theories. Again, you're welcome to do some searching online as well. So I'm going to ask each group to tackle and assign theory that I'll be assigning in just a second. And I'd like one person in the group to write or type your response here for attendance with your group members' names. And then I will be asking each group to turn that in at the end of class, in addition to sharing in just a little bit. So let's do 1, 2, and 3 on uses and gratification. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 on social presence. We'll do 1, 2, and 3 on media richness. We'll do 1, 2, and 3 on social information processing theory. So take a moment, move over to your groups and start to tackle some of these questions. Yeah.
I guess.
Let's take about 5 or 6 more minutes here.
Yeah. No, they're not. Yeah, I think that. Not everyone. Really kind of relates to the TV. I get a problem. That kind of falls into
So take another couple minutes here to finish up. Okay, any groups who would like more time? Okay, so let's take some time to hear from each group. I'd like your group to share what this theory is, how this theory relates to sharing identities online, and the role of media according to this theory. So let's start with uses and gratifications.
The theory on uses and gratification is pretty much breaking up why people need media like it.
Mhm.
For self-enjoyment, is it looking up for information, is it a substitute for face-to-face communications?
Uh-huh.
For
Oh, you're fine.
how people try to put this stuff online that best represents them and try to attract people, put material out there that will attract the crowd that they want to.
Yeah, so this is on the right track. There's a few things that I would kind of add in how we're thinking about this theory, right? So you're on the right track in terms of the ways that people are using media to share themselves. Uses and gratifications on the spectrum of media has power over us, so we have power over media, is in the latter case, right? It is very much saying that media's effects are limited, but that we're the leaders in how we're using and informing media in our lives. A really good example of this is if you use any type of streaming, right? If you use Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, or anything else, right? When you go on streaming, not only do you have a whole bunch of streaming outlets to choose from, but while you're on them, you basically get to pick what to watch, right? You get to stream something live based on what you're interested in at the moment. And we see in the streaming wars that a lot of outlets are trying to change or appeal to the interests of the public. Netflix has had some pretty big drops in subscribers. They now have an ad tier, right? And that's because a lot of people have become disinterested in the content that they have and are looking for online content elsewhere. Uses and gratifications theory would tell us that our desires for media are not being fulfilled through Netflix, so we're looking somewhere else. So this theory really falls hard on the perspective that we have a lot of power over media and how we're choosing to use media. And if media does not fit the bill for us, then we're going to look somewhere else to get our own needs met. How about social presence theory?
So we got a little bit confused, I think, about what exactly you're finding. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that social presence theory was kind of like the way that media that is not face-to-face kind of mimics being there socially, such as if it's like Zoom,
Yep.
it's sort of being like you're talking face-to-face.
Yep.
And this develops people's identities online because the more that it simulates being in person with somebody, the more personable you're going to be, rather than if you could fake who you are over text, it's easier.
Mhm.
And the greater that the medium is simulating in person, the more satisfied people are going to be.
That's on the money. So social presence theory is very much examining to what extent are people present or available or able to engage in mediated encounters, right? So one extreme, if somebody's on Zoom, but they're muted, their video's off, and they're like sorting laundry or not actively in the meeting. I've done that before, right? That would be an example of not having a very strong social presence. But say you're in a guild, in a game, right? Or you're like video chatting with a friend while you're playing something, or you have a really meaningful conversation on your phone or through Zoom, right? Your presence and your ability to be there in that meeting is going to look really different. So this idea of presence can be measured in terms of both how we're choosing to be involved, if we have some level of agency, is our video on or off, but also what limitations exist in media that are impacting our ability to participate. If we are in a phone call and we don't have anything like a camera or FaceTime, right, then that's going to impact our presence too. So social presence theory is examining to what extent we can be in and involved through media. Let's talk next about media richness theory.
So in my own words, you kind of said how much information you're getting out of the communication. So in the episode, it kind of says we don't have nonverbal behaviors to help us interpret the words that we are reading, and like with face-to-face communication, on the other hand, we have a full realm of nonverbal behavior that we can attend to in an effort to understand somebody's message.
Yeah.
So how does this theory explain how people develop and share their identities online? We kind of said, like, for example, Instagram, people, they don't necessarily, like you said earlier, they don't show like what they're doing every day. They kind of show what they enjoy doing, like their activities and all that. What influence does media have on people's lives according to this theory? So a quote that came from the passage is, the richer the media, the less ambiguous a message is for the receiver. So it's kind of like there's the person chooses, they want, like, obviously less ambiguous, they want to understand it, so they'll kind of gravitate towards more information.
Yeah, great. So yes, media richness theory is a theory you can think about as a spectrum, right? You have very cold or unengaged media. So like sending somebody a fax, right? Or sending an email, which can be very stilted, asynchronous, not really very engaged, right? But on the other extreme, if you do something like a video call or you're playing a game together, you have some really close engagement with that person, right? There is less ambiguity because your communication is more direct and you're able to use things such as nonverbal cues, right? Richer media is more appealing to us. It fulfills more of our needs. There's a reason that a lot of people have been leaving outlets like Twitter and Facebook and moving over to outlets like TikTok, right? Or Snapchat, because in something like TikTok or Snapchat, you not only have text, but you also have images and video, you have audio, right? There is multi-modal engagement that you aren't getting somewhere else. That's part of why things like virtual reality are getting popular and will probably have even more influence later too. Lastly, let's talk about social information processing theory.
Yeah, so you look at the book and it looks online and you kind of got two different things.
Okay.
You said it lacks nonverbal cues. So when we make the lack nonverbal cues, we make impressions off of nonverbal cues, stuff like that. And this means that relationships often take longer to develop.
Yes,
Is that roughly correct?
it is. Yeah, hyper-personal communication.
All right, and then how does this theory affect how people share their identities online? You look at like Twitter, people are like terrible on there because they have, it's just what their words are. And then number 3 is what influences does media have over people's lives. Yeah, the lack of ability to terrible. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So, I mean, yes, it absolutely can, right? Social information processing, I think the big thing to kind of break down and take away from this reading and from this theory is the presence of hyperpersonal, right? This theory comes from Joseph Walther, and Walther argued that media has the power to create connections and communication that is more powerful or closely connected than face-to-face interpersonal communication. It's a hot take, but the idea of our ability to communicate, text, message, video call people that we wouldn't see normally face-to-face, our ability to engage in specific communities online and do activities online are part of the argument that mediated communication can be more powerful or influential than face-to-face communication. So if you've had a bit of trouble or struggled a little bit with some of these, this week's Canvas prompt is asking you to look at these theories in a little bit more detail and some of the contrasts between them. So I encourage you to continue to kind of look at that there. But we have had some time this class to discuss and break down some of the ideas from these theories. So today we talked about identity through online interactions, the idea that identity is presented differently across context and situation. We also helped to understand identity formulation online through some of these theories. Again, we are not meeting on Friday. Enjoy your long weekend for Labor Day. On Monday, we'll be talking about relationships and the ways that relationships develop through interpersonal communication. So please email or pass forward your group's work if you haven't done so already. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I will see you on Monday.